People who work in haunted hotels, what are your stories? We would rent out pretty much all of the Beverly Hilton for a full 7 days. You can go to this if you'd like, it just costs thousands of dollars to do so. I, like OP, also am interested in hotel staff and haunting, so I asked every staff member I could about any otherworldly experiences. I heard a couple of people talk about Merv Griffin, the game show creator, host, and composer. He bought the place in the 80s and loved to hang out there after he retired. After he died, the staff said they would see him, not as a ghostly shape, but as the actual Merv, walking down one of the hallways near the kitchens occasionally. Ultimately, though, the cleaning staff was terrified of the 8th floor. It's not a tall hotel, and the 8th floor was a party-type room. It was a medium-sized banquet-type area with a low ceiling. It has a bathroom and a view of Beverly Hills, with rounded red leather couches and maroon velour-sided walls. There is a curved bar and glass tables with razor blade marks on them from the copious amounts of cocaine that have been chopped up for consumption. I know you see this room in your head right now. The story goes that there was a lady that would go up there and clean the place by herself after the parties were over. One night, she was almost done, and finishing up in the bathrooms cleaning the sinks. She heard a girl behind her. Then, something brushed across her shoulder. She turned quickly around, and no one was there. She turned back to the sink, and there was a piece of gum where there previously had been none. She swore there was no gum in the sink prior to this experience, as she was cleaning it when it happened, so she was very focused on it. After that, the cleaning staff would not go up there unless they had to at night, and even then, they would go in pairs. They also started to clean the floor in the morning. Again, only with 2 people. My buddy/coworker and I had to go up and check this out. We were getting chills just listening to the story and had to see for ourselves. So at about 9 p.m., we went up there, as it was vacant for the night and we pretty much had the run of the hotel. Right before we went up though, we saw one of the cleaning staff and told him where we were going. And he's got this look on his face like, you're an idiot. We head up, check the whole room out, and take it in like I described above. We go over to the little bathroom where the gum incident happened, and we recreated the scene. I stood at the sink, my buddy brushed my shoulder, and I turned around. Nothing. Absolutely nothing at all. We didn't feel coldness or freakiness, just plain old us on the top floor. We were a bit disappointed, and we were saying things like, well, what did we expect, type conversation. Then we noticed the weird music on the speaker in the elevator that we hadn't noticed coming up. It was a girl kind of singing/laughing. Very eclectic stuff. When we got off, we saw the cleaning dude from earlier, and told him that we saw nothing. There was no ghost up there. Then my buddy mentioned the interesting choice of music in the elevator. The cleaning guy said, "What music?" And he replied, "The music in the elevator." He then pointed out that there's not a speaker in the elevator. Never has been. We shit our pants, went back into the elevator cautiously, because we couldn't believe what we were hearing was not coming from a speaker. Being IT experts, we knew how to look for wires and speaker covers and such. And he was right. There were none. It was an old elevator that just wasn't wired for all that. We noped the fuck out of that elevator and tried to avoid it the rest of the time we worked there. Not a hotel, but I'm a backstage doorman at a Broadway theater. Well, I was. Fucking COVID. There's one particular theater that everyone swears is haunted, the Belasco. And while that isn't my normal place, I've been there alone at night a few dozen times, but I've never seen anything. My friend told me he was working there once, and right before he was going to lock up, he was standing on stage and saw a ghost kid in the mezzanine. So he ran out of the theater and locked the door behind him. I was like, hey, I'm pretty sure you locked a child in the theater, you idiot. There was no kid to be found, so maybe I'm the idiot. When you walk backstage at the theater, there's a big picture of Mr. Belasco, who died in 1931, and most of the doormen and security guys say good morning and good night to it, because they're afraid he'll be pissed if they don't. I work with a bunch of lunatics. I worked as a housekeeper at a haunted hotel for about a year. There's many stories I could tell, but there was this one room that fucked me up mentally for months. I still have nightmares about it now. So the hotel is a grade 2 listed building, a manor house that was converted into a hotel. It's said that the family who built it and lived there originally had their bedrooms where room 1, 2, and 3 now are. The rooms are out of the way and down a dark corridor, which gives them an eerie feeling, but they're actually decent rooms. Number 2 is one of the biggest and most luxurious rooms to stay in. However, it's rumored that when the house was being converted, that the builders found the skeleton of a child in the fireplace. The fireplace that's still in that room. The room opens up to a long corridor, the bathroom on the left, and a super king bed in a huge living area looking over the gardens. I never felt right in there, but things got worse a few months in when I started having nightmares that I was being chased down the room's corridor. I'd never see what was chasing me, but I'd be filled with terror. The corridor would just keep going for what seemed like forever, but when I'd reach the door, there was no handle. I had that dream every night for months. My teeth got damaged from all the grinding, and I was so exhausted that I could barely do the job. In the end, the place got me so depressed, I was self-harming again, something I'd been clean of since I was a teen. Since quitting the job, that dream and my mental health have improved. The dream became much less frequent, but I still get it from time to time when things are going bad. The whole hotel is toxic, but that one room still continues to haunt me. Not haunted, but I was an overnight guard at a huge family campground in the hills near where I grew up. One good section of the campground was closed off because we were installing yurts. One night, I'm sitting in the office watching Netflix when the motion detector is triggered in that area. We put them about 5 feet off the ground so raccoons and squirrels don't trigger them. Anyway, policy states that if the detector goes off, I have to go check it out. I head up there and I could hear someone singing, not very good singing. So I radio to my boss that we've got what I thought was a camper exploring in the middle of the night. I approached her and turned on my flashlight, and she immediately starts yelling and running. The boss picks me up in a golf cart, and we're driving around trying to find this lady. We even radioed for a few of the other workers to wake up and help us look for her in case something is wrong. The next morning, we get a call to come down to one of the yurts in a lower loop, a good half-mile away from where we were searching the night before. We get down there and found this lady. She had crawled under a yurt that some family had been staying in and was banging on the floorboards all night long. They were too terrified to do anything, so they waited until morning. Turns out, she was some tweaker who had found her way into the campground and built herself a little nest, a good 100 yards up the hill from where we found her. We found tons of drugs, wallets, car keys, you name it. We figured that she had been living there for about 6 months before we found her, based on the amount of literal shit we found up there. My aunt lives on the Isle of Arran, a small island in Scotland. She used to work in Brodick Castle, and everyone who works or has worked there will tell you it's haunted, and you get told all the classics, like hearing footsteps and seeing doors slam. One story always stuck out to me, about a dog and its owner staying the night. The owner wakes up, realizing the dog isn't in the room, so the owner runs out into the hallway to find the dog calmly walking down the dark stretch of hallway of the castle. But the dog was looking up at nothing while strolling, as if it was side by side with someone and looking up at them. The dog walked all the way down the corridor, completely ignoring its owner. Just seeing your dog walk into pitch black with this invisible entity gets me creeped out. I've been to that castle myself, and it's hella spooky. Not me, nor is it a hotel, but a haunted story nonetheless. Growing up, my mom would always tell me stories about the house she lived in prior to marrying my dad. Her family was large and she had 2 young brothers and a 2-year-old nephew. At first, she thought the boys were up to mischief, so disregarded strange occurrences, like belongings being moved in her room, or her neatly made bed being torn up when she got home. Sometimes clothes were also thrown on the floor, etc. One thing she'd notice was always a smell of women's perfume, which she thought strange since it wasn't a scent any of the women of the house wore. Come wedding time, and my mom has her wedding dress hanging on the back of her bedroom door, and this time has gotten a lock for it, to keep the boys out. Upon coming home the night before her wedding, she unlocks the door and finds her wedding dress hanging from the ceiling fan going full blast, and then begins to think freaky shit has actually been going on the whole time. Later that night, she is awoken to a noise but can't see anything, but feels a presence, and when she jumps up to turn on her bedroom lights, there's a butt print on the foot of her bed, and she can smell the perfume again. These were always just made up to me. Then, in 6th grade, I met this kid, and he was strange to say the least. This is the year 2000, and he wore Beatles shirts and would talk about hippie stuff to me, a 10-year-old. Sometimes he would tell me these spooky stories about his house, and how it was haunted by some lady who killed herself because her husband was cheating on her. Apparently, this was common knowledge, as he was the first mayor of our town. Anyways, this lady would play pranks on them, like move objects, lock and unlock doors, there were scents, etc. And I was like, man, you are just as crazy as my mom. So my mom and I were out driving one day, and she stops the car and goes, "That's the house I told you the story is about." Which I'd kind of known. My mom lived in a lot of places. And lo and behold, my freaking classmate is standing in the driveway. To this day, when I doubt stories about haunted places, I always remember their stories. A rental house. My grandparents would rent out a house in the old rundown neighborhood. Sometimes to family, but often to people that would just trash it. They always did background checks, but the renters would get boyfriends that would come into the picture and cause trouble. So I grew up constantly repairing this old house, which everyone agreed was haunted. The most intriguing thing that ever happened to me was a chandelier started swinging above my head, in full circles, without any explanation. My grandma always said that whatever existed in that house liked me more than the other people. Worst story about the place was a fire that happened in the kitchen spontaneously at the table. It never spread around the house, just at the table. Sometime later, a new renter taunted the ghost, saying it didn't exist, calling it names. He died of a heart attack at the kitchen table on the very spot where the fire happened. I worked in a Marriott as a bartender. The restaurant side would close earlier than the bar. It was a giant room and set for next day's breakfast. There was a ceiling-high partition along the middle of the room. My bar was on the other side, along with the patio and pool. There was barely any staff at that time of night. Basically just myself and the front desk almost a block away. I had to walk through the restaurant to access the kitchen. I usually did fruit prep late when it was slow, so many times I walked through the restaurant and saw an older lady sitting in the same seat by herself. And every time I would say, ugh, here we go, dumb customer sitting in the dark, too stupid to know the restaurant's closed. I would gear up for the drama, but then she suddenly wouldn't be there. She didn't scare me. I would prefer her over some entitled Marriott Rewards member. When I worked there, a cop killed himself in that room. The hotel was known for people checking in and committing suicide. I also worked at another haunted hotel before furlough. Same kind of late night alone thing, except that one was a guy. And I saw a blonde chick there too. I can tell that story too if anyone wants to hear it. Not a hotel, but a restaurant. The basement is the most notorious place for occurrences, naturally, and I've had a few unexplainable things go on as I'm in charge of cleaning the basement as one of my shift duties. One time, I was sweeping when I felt the cord to my apron get tugged or loosened somehow. I tie my apron behind my bag, and it's not uncommon for coworkers to teasingly untie it as they walk past. But the area I was sweeping in had only one entranceway, and I was facing it, so I know that it was impossible for anyone to come up behind me and untie the apron without me noticing them. Another time was when I ran down to the basement to change a beer keg in the walk-in, when I spotted something in the corner to my right. The same corner as the other occurrence, mind you. It was out of the corner of my eye, but I swear I saw someone naked squatting in the corner. I did a second glance after I noticed, but there was no one else down there with me. It weirded me out a good bit, but I played it off as just me imagining things. But I still swear I saw it. Not a hotel, but an old prison in England. I visited it when I was around the age of 9, while on vacation. It was now a museum with creepy dolls in the cells who represent the criminals who live and or died there. For example, one was a woman who killed her child by drowning it in a well. It's safe to say I was creeped out by those dolls. The entire time we were there, I had the feeling that there were more people than the other visitors of the museum. I felt kinda like there was a cold stream of air around, and I had the feeling that something was staring at me the whole time. I can't really describe it, but I was really scared and uncomfortable. It was like I felt the presence of the spirits or ghosts of the people who had died at the prison. And honestly, the dolls didn't help. I remember writing in my diary about what I felt in there. Years later, when I was around the age of 16, I found that diary and tried to find the prison on Google. Well, my feelings weren't unusual in that place. It's been known as haunted. My parents and I didn't know at the time, but finding out that I felt what I felt without knowing it was haunted at the time was so fucking terrifying and thrilling at the same time. I still think about it sometimes, and I still get chills. So this isn't a hotel, but the movie theater I work at, or used to before COVID-19, has a ghost, or to an effect, some sort of entity that roams around in 2 of the theaters that we see people in. We actually identified some of the information about said ghost. Some of my co-workers used a Ouija board after their shift was over and found some more out about the ghost/demon/whatever it might be. We were told her name is Layla. She's around 4 to 6 years old, and she likes to mess with us because she thinks it's funny. Some of the things she does include sitting in a very specific chair in both theaters that she roams. She also sometimes makes us see stuff in the hallways. We'll see shadows and shapes in the projector rooms, silhouettes of her, stuff like that. She said she doesn't mind us if I remember correctly. To tell you the truth though, I don't really know if this is a ghost or not, but there's definitely something there. I worked in a hotel that a lot of the employees thought was haunted. Everyone had stories, but this one happened to me. We were finishing up a big event on Halloween, and we were in the back of the hotel putting away tables and chairs. There were 3 or 4 of us back there. The hotel was next to a large apartment building, so there was an alleyway in which we could, for the most part, see just about everything that would come up or down it. There was really no way to get out of that alley unseen, but it was maybe 3 feet below the parking lot where we were standing. There was a maybe 3-foot tall metal fence before the alleyway, and the only thing blocking any portion of the alleyway view was a tree and a medium-sized generator. So we're putting away the tables and we look to our left, and see what looks like a homeless lady, walking very slowly in front of us, entering our view from the left. She was wearing pink Uggs and like a dirty old skirt that went down to her knees. The weird part is that no one saw her face because she was holding up a blanket around her head. We were a pretty upscale hotel, and weren't supposed to let homeless people wander around our parking lot, but for some reason none of us said a word. We were silently watching her slowly walk past us. She eventually veers to her left and goes behind the generator. Maybe 15 to 30 seconds later, the valet manager comes from where she walked from with his flashlight and looks at us and says, "Where did she go?" We point to the generator, and he goes over there to look. We expected her to be behind there because it was literally 30 seconds at most since she had gone back there. He comes out and says, "Where did she go?" again. The only places she could have been were behind the generator, up the tree, or crouched behind that little bit of wall that makes up the 3-foot-high difference between our parking lot and the alleyway. But she was gone, completely disappeared. She would have had to run at least a 4.3 40-yard dash while crouched below a 3-foot wall and make no noise to be able to get out of there without us seeing or hearing her run. Nothing. We checked everywhere, and she wasn't there. We were absolutely flabbergasted. It was impossible, and there were 5 grown men who witnessed it. I usually walked or rode my bike to work, so I was pretty familiar with most of the homeless people who congregate in that area, and I had never seen anyone like that, or ever saw anyone like that ever again. It's not a very scary ghost story, but I'm a very practical person and don't believe in ghosts. But this was the most unexplainable occurrence I had ever had. Worked in a haunted daycare for 10 years. We could hold 250 kids and we were open till 11 at night. It first started when I started getting complaints from the teachers in the back room that they could hear a child playing in the gym. Video showed nothing. Going back there showed nothing. It snowballed from there. The worst time was the first time. I was closing up in the back and had to check all the doors, shut off lights, etc. It was about 10 at night. There was 1 teacher left and 2 children. They were in the front building sleeping while the teacher watched them. I walked into one of the rooms that was for the 3-year-olds in the back of the second building. I'm checking the door when I hear the TV go off in the room next door. That room was also a room for 3-year-olds, and I had just closed it. I go into the next room, see the room has the lights on, and the TV is on a static station. The water is on full blast in the sink. I turn everything off and go to the front building. I tell the teacher she didn't scare me. The teacher then asked what I was talking about. I grabbed the laptop and we watched the last few minutes on tape. There was no person in that room. There is also no audio. On camera, I walk in, check things, then walk out. Camera shows TV turn on, then the overhead lights. We were not able to see when the water came on. The next day I started checking around. Apparently they used to have a government-funded pre-K class. A little girl was going home. Father did not put her in a car seat or buckle her up. There was a wreck and the little girl died. Found her obituary and everything in the local paper. We all assume that the ghost is her, but why would she return to the daycare instead of where she died? That's beyond me. I've got tons of stories from other teachers as well. Most of them surround that back room. I was there for many years and have been offered to buy the place. At this point, I'm considering it. This is actually one I can answer with personal experience. For a time, I worked at a local motel that has since been demolished, and it was so known by locals that it was haunted that most people didn't even blink an eye at some of the happenings around. A few years ago, someone was murdered at the hotel, and from then on, it was said that whenever you would go into the room, there was a spot in that room. No matter the time of year, whether hot or cold, that would drop in temperature and be much colder than the rest of the room. I was taken into the room one day and could confirm myself it was true. You could feel the temperature in that one particular spot drop. But the big one for me was one I personally experienced while working alone. I worked in laundry, and one day when I was in the middle of folding towels, I happened to see a woman pass by and go in the direction of the small office in our laundry room. It wasn't unusual for people to come in or come by, as guests could come by to ask for extra towels and stuff, so I assumed it was just someone who needed something. I went into the office and nobody, and it was a small room. There was a tiny bathroom attached, but no one was in that either, and there was only the one door in and out of the office, but there was absolutely nobody there. And the room was filled in such a way that they couldn't have hid either, outside of under the desk that was in there, but I looked and no one was there either. I worked in a casino in the early 2000s. It's in a really lovely building constructed in the mid-1880s, so of course it's going to be haunted, right? There were a couple hallways and a room on the second floor of the hotel, which spooky stuff occurred in. A strange object, sometimes gray or black, was seen. One afternoon shift, the guy I worked with had to be sedated by a paramedic, he was so panicked. I heard this secondhand as I was working elsewhere at the time, so all I knew was that Alvin had to go to the hospital urgently. The story Alvin told was that he was cleaning the hot section of one of the restaurants in preparation for the service that night. No one else was there. Alvin apparently saw a black shape with no real defined edge just drift across the kitchen through the wall into the adjoining room where this thing apparently had been seen before. It made no sound, he only looked up because it appeared in his peripheral vision. He was a Filipino guy, and a really nice fella, devout Catholic. After that, he wouldn't work in the kitchen alone. A few months later, I'm working a 2300 to 0700, standard graveyard shift. I had to go into the room where the black thing apparently has been seen a number of times, and the very room Alvin says it went through the kitchen wall into. It was perhaps 3:30 to 4 a.m. I knew I was entering the spooky room and was wondering what it looked like. I unlock the door, turn on the light, walk in, and the large bar fridge with a Happy Red Coke logo is buzzing away. There's stacks of glasses and stuff around, a broken poker machine in the corner, etc. It was just so mundane and anticlimactic. I laughed to myself and thought, of all the rooms, this is the one you choose to haunt? The learning of this story is that buzzing fridges full of sauces and stuff repel amorphous black things that lurk in rooms and hallways. Alvin eventually became a bus driver, by the way.